Hi, I'm Noreen. My sister once introduced me as the family failure, right before she and our parents laughed and dumped dirty mop water all over me. They thought it was funny. They thought I was nothing. What they didn't know was that I was their CEO. So tell me, how do you face a family who spent a lifetime humiliating you when you're the one holding all the power? Before we begin, tell me, what time is it where you are? And have you ever been the scapegoat in your own family? Let's talk in the comments. I hadn't walked into this building in years, but the air inside still carried the same chill I remembered. Houston's late autumn breeze followed me through the glass doors before fading behind the lobby's warm lighting. I paused for a second, steadying myself, reminding my hands not to shake. Tonight was Darla's big night, and even though she hadn't asked me to come, I showed up because that was what I had always done. Show up. Stay quiet. Keep peace. The reception staff hurried past me with boxes and clipboards, barely noticing I was there. When a stack of name cards slid off a table and spilled at my feet, I bent to gather them. As I reached for the last card, one of the buttons on my blouse came loose. It slipped out of the thread like it had been waiting for the exact moment to betray me. No one offered to help. No one even glanced in my direction. It was the kind of small, familiar neglect that stayed with you longer than open cruelty. I stood up, brushing imaginary dust from my hands. I had worked in this very corporation longer than anyone in my family could imagine, but always from angles they never noticed. From their point of view, I was simply the youngest daughter who floated around, doing odd jobs, never quite belonging anywhere. If only they knew the truth behind those quiet years. If only they knew who had really kept the company alive during its hardest turns. But tonight wasn't the night to reveal any of that. Not yet. I heard Darla's voice before I saw her. "There she is," she said loudly enough to turn heads. "Noreen, grab those cleaning supplies. There's a spill near the back hall." I froze. Not because I was surprised, but because she said it with the same tone she used when we were kids, like she was instructing someone she didn't respect. She pointed toward a yellow cart the janitorial team had left parked beside the elevator. Then she waved the event staff over and added, "If she's not given something simple to do, she gets in the way. Just let her handle the easy stuff." A few people chuckled, assuming she was joking. But I recognized that tone. Darla wasn't joking. I walked toward the cart without arguing. The staff parted around me, polite but dismissive. The floor near the hallway entrance had a spilled drink on it, and I knelt to wipe it up because it was easier than explaining myself. While I worked, Darla passed by with a coworker, tossing over her shoulder, "See, she's always been good with chores." Her friend laughed like it was harmless. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept wiping until the floor shined. As I stood, memories pressed in. School events where I was forgotten, birthdays where my name was missing from the card, conversations where they talked around me as if I were decoration. I had learned long ago that if I didn't want a scene, I had to swallow the sting and move on. Keep the peace. That was my place. I stepped back toward the main hall just as my parents arrived. My mother's eyes swept the room before landing on me. She frowned, the familiar, disappointed kind. "Why are you kneeling like that? Get up and stay out of the way. You know how you complicate things." My father nodded without looking fully at me. "Please don't start anything today. This is Darla's moment." Those words hit harder than Darla's comments. They didn't yell. They didn't insult me outright. They just dismissed me with the same practiced ease they'd used my entire life. A quiet dismissal can cut deeper than a loud one. Across the room, people gathered around Darla, congratulating her. She looked radiant, confident, every part of her soaking in the attention she believed she earned alone. I watched from a few steps back, more like a guest than a sister. One of her coworkers leaned in and joked, Big night. You've worked hard. Darla smirked, then flicked her chin toward me. Someone's got to clean up the trash around here. My mother laughed softly, trying to play along. My father gave an awkward smile. Neither corrected her. Neither told her to stop. I swallowed, feeling something shift inside me. A kind of pressure, not anger exactly, more like clarity. I looked at them all and wondered for the first time what they would say if they knew the truth about who I was to this company. If they knew whose signature stabilized payroll, whose strategy saved the Southwest Division, whose decisions quietly outranked every person in this room. Would they dare talk to me like this? But the moment passed. I tucked the thought away. This wasn't the time. Darla glanced at me again, her lips curling into a smirk she didn't bother hiding. Come here, Noreen. We need you for something before the ceremony starts. Her tone made my stomach tighten. I followed her line of sight toward the janitor's closet at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open, the kind of careless setup that told me trouble was waiting inside. I stepped into the storage room, expecting to grab a box of napkins or maybe a roll of paper towels. The fluorescent light overhead flickered once, humming like it hadn't been touched in years. The air inside was heavy. Bleach, mildew, something faintly metallic. A row of mops leaned like forgotten soldiers against the wall, and rusted shelves sagged under half-empty bottles of cleaner. Before I could fully turn around to ask what she needed, the door shut behind me with a soft click. I froze. Perfect. Stay right there. Darla's voice came through the crack, too smooth, too pleased. I didn't move. Not right away. My instincts weren't screaming yet, but they were pacing. Then her heels clicked against the tile as she stepped into view, followed by two of the event staff. Both young men, maybe interns or temps. One of them looked uncomfortable from the jump. The other kept his eyes fixed on the floor. Darla pointed toward a grimy yellow bucket tucked into the corner. I recognized it immediately. It was the same one I had used to clean the spill earlier, only now the water inside was murky, thick with dirt and whatever else had been on that hallway floor. "Let's not waste a good opportunity," she said, as if she were about to raise a glass. "Hold her arm so she doesn't flinch and cause a mess." I blinked at her. "You're not serious." "Oh, come on," she sang. "It's just a little fun." I backed up, both palms raised. "Darla, you're taking this too far." She walked closer, hands curled around the handle of the mop bucket, like it was a gift. Her smile didn't waver. "You always think everything's about you. This is a celebration. Loosen up." I turned, reaching for the doorknob, but one of the staff members slid in front of me, his arm out in that awkward, unsure way of someone who didn't want to touch me, but also didn't want to lose his job. "Please move," I told him, trying to keep my voice calm. He didn't. He just looked to Darla. She grinned wider. "He's just doing what he's told, like you should." I heard footsteps approaching, heavier ones. For one moment, just one blessed second, I thought rescue had arrived. Then I saw them, my parents. They stood in the doorway, just far enough to be safe from whatever was happening inside. My mother's brows pulled together, her lips parted like she wasn't sure what to say. My father didn't speak. He just took in the room, then looked at me. "Mom?" I said, my voice low. "Dad?" My mother's face folded into something familiar, exhausted disappointment. "Just go along with it," she said, her tone barely more than a breath. "This is your sister's day. Don't ruin it." I swallowed against the knot in my throat. She's about to throw dirty mop water on me. My father took a step back. "Don't make this bigger than it has to be." And that was it. That was all they had for me. Darla didn't wait. She lifted the bucket with both hands. I saw the muscles in her forearms flex as she hoisted it up. The smell hit me first. Stale soda, mop water, something sour. My feet stayed rooted. There was nowhere else to go. "Here's to staying in your lane, little sister," she said. Then the bucket tipped. The water was cold, colder than I expected. It hit my scalp first, then ran down the sides of my face, soaking my blouse, my slacks, the thin cardigan I'd worn because the building always kept the AC too high. My arms instinctively crossed in front of me, but it didn't help. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Laughter echoed off the cinder block walls. Darla was howling. One of the staff chuckled weakly, but even he looked like he regretted being there. The other guy looked away. I stood there, dripping. The mop water pooled around my shoes, mixing with the dust on the floor to form a cloudy puddle. A button from my blouse, loosened from the earlier snag, popped off and hit the ground with a soft ping. I stared at it for a second before crouching down to pick it up, hands trembling just slightly. Something inside me changed then, not like a thunderclap, but more like the slow twist of a dial. The temperature of my shame cooled, giving way to something else. I wasn't numb, I was awake. I straightened. Water slid down the back of my neck. "You shouldn't have done that," I said. No yelling, no dramatics, just 5 quiet words. The room fell still. Even the fluorescent light seemed to hush. Darla's smirk returned. "Clean yourself up. You look like trash." Neither of my parents looked at me. I walked past them, through the doorway, into the hall, leaving a trail of dirty footprints behind me. Some people turned their heads. Others quickly turned away. A few gave me that pitying smile people wear when they don't know where to place their discomfort. I didn't care. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the weight of water in my clothes, but because something inside me was shifting, aligning. The part of me that had tolerated this for decades was no longer willing to stay silent. As I walked toward the restroom to dry off, the memories I had buried for years began clawing their way back to the surface. I pushed the door open with my elbow and stepped into the restroom, leaving a trail of grimy footprints behind me. The sharp scent of bleach and lavender cleaner hit me like a wall. It was empty, quiet, just the buzzing light overhead and the squish of my wet shoes against the tile. The mirror greeted me with brutal honesty. My hair was plastered to my face, strings of it stuck to my forehead like I'd just walked through a storm. My blouse, once white and crisp, was stained gray and yellow in patches. A long, wet streak ran down my side. The missing button gaped at the collar like a silent joke. I grabbed a wad of paper towels and tried blotting the worst of it, but the stink wouldn't leave. It clung to me, sour, grimy, a physical reminder that this had happened, that my own sister had poured filth over me like I was nothing, and that my parents had stood there. As I moved, something small slipped out from the fold in my blouse and landed softly on the sink edge. The button. I picked it up slowly, turning it between my fingers. It was cracked now, split right down the center. And just like that, I was 12 again. That summer day had smelled of barbecue and cut grass. Our block in Houston had thrown one of those neighborhood parties, folding chairs, lemonade, classic rock playing from someone's garage. Darla, already in high school, had been the star, as always. She wore denim shorts and lip gloss and the confidence of a girl who believed the world revolved around her. I remembered trying to follow her toward the group of older kids by the driveway, but before I could speak, she turned and said, "Oh, she's not with us. She's the neighbor's kid." The words sliced through the air so cleanly, no one even blinked. One of the boys laughed. My mother, standing a few feet away with a paper plate in her hand, chuckled and didn't correct her. My father had been at the grill. He looked over, met my eyes, then looked away. I stood near the fence for the rest of the party, alone, pretending I didn't care, pretending I didn't hear. That was the first time I realized I could be surrounded by family and still feel utterly invisible. I shook my head now, blinking away the sting that had nothing to do with mop water. I stared into the mirror. I looked like a ghost of myself, soaked and forgotten. But beneath the surface, something deeper stirred. A thread of steel I hadn't felt in a long time. I'd spent a lifetime trying to fit in, to earn a seat at a table where they never saved me a chair. And today made it clear. I was never meant to be welcome. I'd just been tolerated until I outlived my usefulness. I threw the damp towels in the trash, slid the button into my pocket, and took one last look at the reflection that no longer scared me. Then I stepped back into the hallway, turning right to avoid the crowd. The air was cooler here, quieter. Just the hum of vents and the faint echo of music from the main ballroom. I walked past a row of storage doors and temporary divider walls. That's when I heard her. Darla's voice, smooth, clipped, rehearsed. She was standing just beyond the partition, speaking to someone I couldn't see. And once this promotion goes through, I'll make sure HR starts the cleanup. Dead weight has no place in this company, starting with my sister. I froze. She doesn't add anything. She just floats around like a mistake no one wants to acknowledge. It's embarrassing. A second voice. Emilia. I remembered her. She'd worked in events for years, always kind, always professional. "What if your parents push back?" Emilia asked. Darla let out a small, knowing laugh. "They already know. They agree. It's time she stops clinging to us like a stray cat." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, half hidden by the wall, letting those words settle inside me like cold stones. It wasn't just a bucket of dirty water. It wasn't just an impulsive act of cruelty. It was deliberate, planned, supported. They were writing me out of my own life, one step at a time, and I had let them. I stepped back slowly, careful not to let my shoes squeak. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. It was steady, focused. They thought I was disposable, but they didn't know. They didn't know the files I'd signed, the names I'd changed, the power I'd wielded silently, right under their noses. They didn't know I'd been watching all along. I whispered, barely audible, "I won't let them write me out." Not out of vengeance, but because I had finally seen it. The life they offered me was never mine to begin with. And now I wanted my own. I reached into my pocket and held the broken button for a moment, then straightened my stained blouse as best I could. I looked like hell, but I had never felt clearer. I turned toward the ballroom. The hum of voices grew louder with each step. Laughter, applause, silverware clinking against glass. Darla was probably already near the stage, basking in attention. But this time, I wasn't shrinking away. As I stepped out of the dim hallway, the sound of applause rolled toward me like a wave, and I knew Darla was about to take the stage. I slipped into the ceremony hall just as the applause began to die down. The room was warm and golden. Ceiling lights softened through silk lanterns, white floral arrangements lining the aisles, and tall banners hanging on each side of the stage that read, "Leadership, Vision, Legacy." Everything about the space was designed to honor someone becoming something more. And yet, I stood there, dripping slightly at the edges, still damp from what had happened only moments ago. A few guests glanced in my direction, their expressions politely confused. No one asked questions. No one approached. They just did what people always do. Looked away quickly, as if I was a crack in the floor they didn't want to trip on. I moved toward the center aisle, but stopped when I saw the seating chart. It was posted on a silver easel by the entry table, surrounded by name tags and a small stack of glossy programs. My eyes scanned the list. Family seating, front row. I looked for my name. It wasn't there. Instead, someone had scribbled my name in pen below a heading that read, "Support Staff, MISC," with a small arrow pointing toward the back. My stomach tightened. I followed the direction anyway, weaving through clusters of people chatting near the buffet and avoiding eye contact. Near the far wall, close to a side service door, I found the seat, folding metal, half tucked behind a plastic trash bin. A bright orange sticker across the back read, "Support staff only." I stood there for a second, just staring at it. Darla didn't need to say anything. She'd spoken volumes with that one label. I glanced across the room. She was standing under one of the chandeliers, laughing with a group of coworkers, sipping something out of a tall glass. She didn't even glance in my direction, and that silence, her pretending not to see me, was louder than any insult. I sat down anyway, because I needed to, because I knew if I walked out now, she'd win again. So I folded my hands over the button I still held and let the sting burn quietly through me. But inside, something was shifting. I wasn't humiliated the way I used to be. I was awake, and that awareness, though painful, steadied me. Not everyone who's powerful makes noise. Sometimes power waits. Quietly. Unseen. Across the aisle, my parents made their way to their seats. My mother smoothed down the front of Darla's blazer as if she were preparing her for a magazine shoot. My father smiled and placed a hand on Darla's shoulder. "Tonight is yours," he said, beaming with a kind of pride I had never seen directed at me. Not once. I lowered my gaze, not to hide, but to center myself. They didn't even glance my way, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. The crowd settled. A man in a sharp navy suit walked up to the microphone at the edge of the stage. "Thank you all for joining us this evening to celebrate an extraordinary milestone for one of our brightest leaders." The room filled with polite applause again. I didn't move. He continued, listing accomplishments. Team expansion, departmental restructuring, cost-saving measures, and our most profitable quarter to date. All things I had quietly signed off on behind closed doors. And yet, here I sat, labeled support staff. My hands stayed still in my lap, the button pressed into my palm like a tiny anchor. Behind me, 2 men stood by the open bar. Their voices drifted over in casual conversation. "She's impressive," one said. "That Darla woman carried the whole project like a champ." "Honestly," the other added, "she's the reason this division didn't collapse. She's practically carrying the family." I froze. A strange mix of emotion hit, like being praised and erased in the same breath. I wanted to turn around, to say, actually, the reason this company is still standing is because I fought tooth and nail behind the scenes to keep it alive. The legal clearances, the funding, the partnerships. My name's on every single one. But I didn't speak, because they wouldn't believe me. Not now. Not like this. So I sat there, quiet, listening, letting the weight of that truth settle somewhere deeper than anger. Their words didn't hurt because they were wrong. They hurt because they proved how effective the illusion had been. Darla had convinced the world that she was the spine of the business, while I had been its heartbeat, beating, hidden, sustaining everything in silence. I clenched the button a little tighter. My breath slowed. This was the last time I'd allow them to define who I was. The lights dimmed slightly. The room quieted. A hush fell as Darla stepped onto the stage. She was wearing a tailored navy pantsuit and confidence like perfume. She smiled into the room like she was receiving a crown. A spotlight washed over her as she approached the podium. "Thank you," she said smoothly. "It means so much to be here tonight. I've always believed that hard work rises, and it's humbling to see that belief rewarded." There were nods from the crowd. She continued, pausing just long enough to let the moment stretch. Of course, not everyone believes in putting in the effort. Some people just exist, you know? A few chuckles spread through the audience, harmless on the surface. But I knew better. Her eyes never left the crowd, But I knew that line was meant for me. I didn't react, not outwardly. I just sat there, letting the words sink in, not as wounds, but as markers. Each one a notch in the record of who she had chosen to become. Each one a reminder of how far she was willing to go to erase me from her story. But stories don't disappear that easily, and I hadn't even begun to tell mine. If I stayed in that chair as the applause carried on, distant and hollow in my ears, like it was happening in another room, in someone else's life. My hands were still folded tightly over the cracked button. It had become a habit now, something to keep me tethered when everything else felt slippery. Across the room, people clinked glasses, raised their phones to take pictures, leaned in to hug Darla. They looked at her like she was the story, the miracle, the one who carried us all. I sat there in the shadow of it. Then I heard my mother's voice. She wasn't whispering, she never did, not when she wanted to be heard. "We couldn't be prouder," she said to a group of Darla's colleagues, one hand on her chest like she was accepting an award herself. "Darla's carried this family name farther than we ever imagined." Someone murmured a compliment. My father added, chuckling, "Noreen never had that kind of ambition. Some kids just stay where they're comfortable, you know?" They all laughed politely. And there it was, a punch dressed up in casual talk. I'd heard versions of that line my entire life. But somehow tonight, the sting went deeper. Maybe it was because I'd already been wrung out emotionally. Maybe it was because I thought, foolishly, that somewhere under their disappointment was a trace of affection. But no, just more of the same. I stood up slowly, careful not to draw attention. The room was too loud, too bright, too curated. I slipped through the side exit and out into the hallway. The air was cooler there, still holding onto the bite of early evening. My back hit the wall, and I let myself breathe. I wasn't going to cry. I'd promised myself I wouldn't. But the pressure behind my eyes was rising fast, and my throat was tight. I clenched my jaw, trying to push the words away. Things I couldn't say in that room, things I'd never be allowed to. Was I really the problem? Had I always been? All those years trying to make myself useful, helpful, responsible. I'd convinced myself I was doing it out of love. But maybe I was just trying to earn a place I'd never truly had. Maybe I was the family's obligation, not their pride. A few steps away, a woman hovered near the catering station. She was about Darla's age, with short, practical hair and a staff badge clipped to her blazer. She caught my eye and hesitated. "You're Noreen, right?" she asked gently, stepping closer. I nodded, unsure whether I should brace myself for another comment wrapped in concern. She looked almost apologetic. "I always wondered why Darla never thanked you for that proposal." I blinked. "What proposal?" She tilted her head, confused. "The one that saved the department, 5 years ago. She submitted it when everything was about to get slashed. It was brilliant, outlined the restructuring, built the roadmap we're still following today." My stomach dropped. "I remember reading the draft metadata," she added. "It had your initials. I figured you co-wrote it, or she'd give you credit later. But I never got credit. I never even knew she'd submitted it." I nodded slowly, thanking her, but my thoughts were already racing back, years unspooling in reverse. I saw Darla, sitting on the couch with her laptop open, asking me to just polish the proposal she'd drafted. I remembered her saying, "You're better with language. I'll make sure they know it was your brain." And I, naive and trusting, believed her. It wasn't the only time either. There were other documents, other moments. "Could you clean this up? Mind if I use your chart? I'll tell them it was your idea." I'd let it go every time, because she was family, because I thought the truth had a way of floating to the surface on its own. But it doesn't. Not always. Sometimes it gets buried, on purpose. I wandered further down the hallway, out a side door, and found a bench near the building's edge. The city buzzed faintly beyond the parking lot, a low hum of traffic and life. I sat there and let it all come crashing down. I didn't rage, I didn't scream. I just let the tears fall, quiet and slow, the kind that don't look dramatic but feel endless. All that time I spent hoping, believing that one day they'd see me, acknowledge me, maybe even be proud. I'd mistaken tolerance for love, and now I knew better. My fingers opened slowly. The button I'd held all night had cracked clean in two. One jagged edge pressed into my skin like it had split under the weight of my silence. It felt fitting. The last thing holding my belief together had finally broken. And it didn't feel like freedom yet, but it did feel like truth. "They won't stop," I whispered into the empty night. "They never will." And for the first time, I understood. Walking away wouldn't be abandonment. Fighting back wouldn't be betrayal. It would be survival. As I wiped my face with the sleeve of my damp blouse and stood up, I heard my name being called from inside the hall, not with affection, not with care, but with calculation. It was the kind of tone Darla used when she needed to orchestrate something, a cue, a setup. And I had walked straight back into the theater. I steadied my breath and re-entered the ballroom. The lighting had dimmed to a soft, amber glow, and the music now drifted like background silk, just enough to coat the tension with elegance. Small clusters of people chatted over half-empty glasses. Laughter chimed in waves. I aimed for a quiet corner, hoping to disappear into the wallpaper. But Darla saw me. Of course she did. She was already moving before I could change direction, heels clicking, silk dress swaying just so, that familiar smile that only ever reached her mouth, never her eyes. "There you are," she said, looping her fingers around my wrist, like we were old friends at a reunion. Her grip was light but unyielding. "I've been looking all over for you." Her voice was low and pleasant, but there was no mistaking the urgency beneath it. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but she was already guiding me toward a semicircle of sharply dressed executives standing near the catering table. Before I could pull away, she placed a perfectly manicured hand on my shoulder and said brightly, "Everyone, this is my little sister, Noreen." She leaned in just slightly and added, "She's finding her way." There was a moment of silence, awkward and stiff. One of the men nodded politely. Another offered a vague smile. My jaw clenched, but I said nothing. "We're so proud of her," Darla continued, her voice now dipping into the register people use when describing someone recovering from something tragic. "She's really been trying." Trying what? Not to scream? I stood there, feeling like a volunteer for public pity. She didn't want to include me. She wanted to control the narrative. I was her cautionary tale, a soft failure that made her shine brighter by comparison. "She's always struggled with direction," Darla said lightly, as if that explained it all. I caught the flicker of amusement on one executive's face. Another looked down, uncomfortable. A third adjusted his cufflink, clearly ready to move the conversation elsewhere. I wanted to leave. My legs twitched with the urge, but I stayed. I stood there and let her say it. Because something had changed. The shame was still there, but it wasn't the same as before. Then, from behind me, a warm hand gently tapped my arm. I turned to see a woman with a gold name badge and soft gray hair swept back into a low bun. Her eyes were kind, but serious. "Would you mind stepping aside with me for a moment?" she asked, her voice just loud enough for me to hear, but not so much to draw attention. I nodded, grateful for the exit. We walked down a side hallway lined with framed photos of past executives. The hum of voices faded as we moved away from the party. She paused near a bench and faced me. I debated whether to say anything, she began, but I think you deserve to know. I tilted my head, unsure what was coming next. She inhaled, steady but deliberate. I've been with this company a long time, and over the years I've heard a lot about you, through Darla. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if I could. She's been preparing explanations for years, just in case you ever came forward with anything. She told people in leadership that you were unstable, jealous of her career, that you couldn't hold a job, that you were unpredictable. Each sentence landed like a stone dropped in my chest. I felt my breath shorten, my skin go cold. She built a version of you that would be easy to dismiss, the woman said softly. It wasn't just professional, it was personal, strategic. I didn't realize I had leaned back against the wall until the cool surface met my shoulder blades. It wasn't enough for her to outshine me. She'd lit the fire and then built a wall of lies to keep me trapped in the smoke. I whispered, "Thank you for telling me." She nodded, her eyes holding something I couldn't quite name. Empathy, maybe. Or recognition, like she'd seen this kind of pattern before and knew the cost. As she walked away, I stayed rooted for a moment longer. That broken button, still in my pocket, suddenly felt heavier than ever. I reached for it, held it in my palm. But instead of grief, I felt a shift. It wasn't just a remnant of humiliation now. It was a warning. Stay alert. This ends only if I end it. I returned to the ballroom with a new stillness. Not the frozen kind, something firmer. Watching Darla now, I noticed the way her smile wavered every time I looked directly at her. How her hands fidgeted, briefly, before she tucked them neatly behind her back. She felt it too. Something had shifted. I wasn't ready yet, not to confront, not to explode, but I was done shrinking. As I scanned the room again, something unexpected happened. Darla's expression shifted from confidence to irritation, like she suddenly felt threatened by my silence. Her smile faltered, even if just for a second, and her eyes locked on mine like a laser, searching, measuring. I didn't flinch. I held her gaze a moment longer than she expected, and that alone seemed to rattle her. She turned from the group of executives she'd been charming and made her way directly toward me. Steps clipped and precise, her posture still poised but her face tight. She didn't ask permission. She grabbed my arm, not roughly, but firmly, and pulled me toward a hallway off to the side, near the emergency exit where the music dulled and the shadows deepened. "You're acting strange," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like glass. Gone was the syrupy tone from earlier. This was Darla unmasked, cold, calculating, practiced. I didn't respond. My feet kept moving, carried by her momentum and the low hum of anger under my skin. Once we were out of sight from the rest, she let go of my arm and stood close. Too close. She leaned in, her voice low but sharp. "Listen carefully. If you try anything tonight, anything, I will make sure everyone here sees you exactly how I've told them you are. Unhinged, bitter, jealous." I blinked slowly, focusing on her words, but refusing to let them hit the center of me. She stepped closer still, the heat of her breath just inches from my face. "You think Mom and Dad won't back me? Please. They already think you're unstable. I've made sure of it." My breath caught in my throat, but I didn't let her see it. I kept my face steady, though my heart raced with the force of 100 unspoken rebuttals. She mistook my stillness for fear. Her lips curled. "Silence doesn't make you strong, Noreen. It makes you predictable." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, creased neatly, like it had been carried for months, maybe years. "Look at this," she said, holding it out like a badge of power. "This is why you'll never win." I took it, hands trembling before I could stop myself. It was a printed HR complaint, typed out neatly and signed with my name. The accusations were damning. Claims of Darla sabotaging me, undermining my efforts, gaslighting me. But I'd never written a single word of it. Still, the signature matched mine exactly. My stomach turned. "I've kept this," she whispered. "If you ever try to expose me, I'll say you've been obsessed for years, unstable. This," she tapped the paper, "is all the proof I need." My hands dropped to my sides. The paper slipped through my fingers, fluttering like a discarded receipt before I caught it again. I couldn't breathe for a second, not out of panic, but out of the sheer weight of what she'd done, what she'd prepared for. She hadn't just anticipated a confrontation, she'd engineered the defenses, pre-wrote the counterattack, and positioned me as a threat long before I even considered stepping forward. I stared at her, but she looked almost relaxed, now, like a queen who'd defended her throne with minimal effort. "Stay in your lane, Noreen," she said, soft but cruel. "You're not built for anything else." That line. It wasn't new. She'd said it in different forms all my life. So had my parents. So had teachers, family friends, even past coworkers. "You're not built for this. You should keep things simple. Don't aim too high." It had never felt like a sentence, until now. I exhaled slowly and folded the paper neatly, handing it back to her. "You should keep it then," I said, steady, quiet. Her expression twitched, just enough to tell me that wasn't the reaction she expected. She looked down at the paper, then back at me, confused, like I'd rewritten a script she'd already memorized. I walked past her, not quickly, not with drama, but with clarity. Back in the main hall, the lights flickered once. A soft chime rang through the speakers, and the host stepped onto the stage, clearing his throat into the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just been informed that the CEO will be arriving in just a few minutes." People straightened in their seats. The energy shifted, the kind of tension that comes when power is about to enter the room. I stood near the back, not hiding anymore, watching, waiting. My heart thudded hard, but not from fear, from timing. And when I glanced across the room, Darla was staring back, brows pinched, lips pursed. That edge of discomfort had returned to her face, stronger now, like she couldn't quite read me anymore, like she sensed the ground was no longer steady. Darla took a half step back, but just as quickly, she masked it with a tight-lipped smile and turned her head, pretending nothing had shifted. The host at the microphone cleared his throat again, his voice crisp over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO will be arriving shortly." That one sentence sent a ripple of awareness through the ballroom. People straightened their jackets, adjusted their dresses, checked their teeth in the reflections of champagne flutes. The room snapped to attention. I stepped toward the center of the space, wiping my damp hands against the sides of my dress, still slightly stained from the mop water, but drying in the warm air. Behind me, I felt the weight of Darla's stare. She was trying to figure out what had just changed. She could feel it. She just didn't know what it meant yet. Then, from my right, my mother appeared, perfectly timed like she always was when there was a chance to maintain her image. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Fix your face," she said, barely moving her lips. "You look miserable." Before I could respond, Dad followed with his own brand of affection. "Try not to embarrass your sister tonight, all right?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Their words, once sharp enough to slice through me, now floated past like faint radio static from a station I'd stopped tuning into years ago. Darla glided over to us, her energy a mix of nerves and performance. She looped her arm through Mom's like we were in the middle of a family photo shoot and turned to the small circle of people around us. "She's just overwhelmed," she said with a light laugh, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Let's give her a reality check before the CEO arrives." She said it like a joke, but I knew that look in her eyes. It wasn't a tease. It was a warning. I glanced toward the buffet table. That's when I saw it. A janitor's mop bucket, metal, dented, full, sat near the corner where the tables met the wall. No one was near it. No one had been mopping. And when Darla's eyes flicked toward it, just for a second, something inside me clenched. I'd seen this setup before. When we were kids, it was chocolate syrup in my lunchbox. In college, it was a wardrobe malfunction she arranged during my solo speech. Now it was mop water. Same cruelty, new outfit. I watched my mother lean toward Dad and nudge his elbow, the two of them sharing that silent look. The same one they shared every time they decided to put me back in my place. I knew what was coming. I just didn't know how far they were willing to go. A minute later, Dad took a casual stroll by the bucket. His foot hit the edge just right, tipping it forward. The bucket clanged. Water sloshed over the rim, spilling across the polished floor toward my shoes. I stepped back quickly, avoiding the first wave. Gasps echoed around the room. "Oh no!" Darla called out, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Let me help." She moved faster than I expected, grabbing the bucket and lifting it like a trophy. "Just water," she said sweetly. And then she flung it at me. Not a splash, not a slip, a full, deliberate throw. Cold, filthy mop water drenched me. My dress, my hair, my arms. I stood there, soaked and stunned, the weight of the liquid pulling at my sleeves, dripping onto the floor. Laughter, first hers, then my parents joined in. Guests nearby were frozen, some with hands over their mouths, others looking away, pretending not to see. "Come on," Darla said with a wink. "It's just water. Don't be so dramatic." I didn't say a word. I just stood there, blinking slowly. The smell of bleach and old rags filled my nose. My dress clung to my skin, my hair stuck to the sides of my face. But I didn't cry. Because in that moment, as the humiliation settled like sediment at the bottom of my lungs, something shifted inside me. All those years of biting my tongue, of letting things slide for the sake of family, of telling myself, they don't mean it. It all broke loose. I stood taller, and Darla saw it. Just a flicker of something she didn't recognize in my eyes. "Sit down," she snapped, her voice suddenly small in the growing silence. I didn't move. The host returned to the mic, holding up a hand to signal the next part of the program. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "please welcome the CEO of this division." Whispers rustled through the crowd. Darla, still smiling, flipped her hair over one shoulder and turned toward the stage. "The CEO," the host repeated, "Ms. Noreen Davenport." Everything stopped. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. The music cut out mid-note. My mother's mouth fell open. My father's hand hovered mid-applause, unsure whether to clap or recoil. Darla turned, the color draining from her face. My dress still dripped. My heels squeaked softly as I stepped forward. People moved aside without being asked. Executives nodded. Staff straightened their backs. The spotlight, which had hovered near Darla all evening, shifted toward me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a footnote. I wasn't background noise. I was the moment. I passed my mother, her lips parted, her hands trembling. What is happening?" she whispered. My father took a small step back, his eyes darting toward the exit. Darla's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. You set me up," she said, but her voice cracked. I didn't answer. I just kept walking. And as I reached the steps to the stage, the entire ballroom held its breath, waiting to see how I would confront the very people who drenched me in filth moments earlier. The applause never came. Not a whisper, not a shuffle. Just a thick, loaded quiet that settled over the ballroom as I stood at the base of the stage steps. My shoes made a faint sound against the polished floor. still damp from the mop water that had soaked through every layer of fabric clinging to me. For the first time that night, no one dared to laugh. No one dared to blink too long. All those eyes, the same ones that moments earlier looked at me with pity or confusion or polite dismissal, were now fixed on me as if they were seeing my face for the very first time. The quiet didn't suffocate me. It steadied me. It gave me something I had never been granted in my own family: space. I drew a long breath and climbed the steps slowly, my hand skimming the rail only for balance, not for reassurance. The spotlight warmed my shoulders and cast a soft glow across the stage. My clothes were still damp, but somehow the weight of the water no longer pulled me down. I turned toward the audience, letting the breath settle in my chest before I spoke. "Thank you," I said. My voice carried farther than I expected. It was calm, smooth, without a tremor. I didn't look at my parents. I didn't search for Darla. I faced the employees, the partners, the people who had shown up tonight to celebrate work, real work, and had unknowingly witnessed something far different. I kept my voice steady as I acknowledged the teams who built our corporation's growth, naming the departments, praising their dedication. I thanked the board for their support. I thanked the staff for their resilience. I didn't mention my family at all. Their silence behind me was louder than any words I could have spoken. As I paused, my gaze drifted down to my hands. My wedding band caught the light, its tiny scratches glimmering like a mosaic. The ring was simple, the kind that wouldn't draw attention. Darla once mocked it for being too plain. She didn't know it was the last gift my husband had given me before he passed. She didn't know how many nights I held it when grief felt too big to carry. That ring had always been a reminder of what I'd lost. Tonight, though, it reminded me of everything I had survived. I lifted my head and finally turned toward my parents and my sister. They were standing a few rows back, rigid, pale, as if waiting to hear the verdict of a sentence they never expected to face. I let the moment settle between us, then spoke with a clarity that felt carved into my bones. Some people believe power comes from humiliating others. My words didn't echo, they landed. I saw Darla's shoulders tighten, her eyes darting between me and the others watching her. But real power, I continued, letting the pause sit just long enough to make the meaning unmistakable, is choosing not to become what hurt you. There was a hush, then a few soft claps from the employees nearest the stage. Their support wasn't loud or performative. It was steady, grounded. Others followed, nodding, murmuring. They had seen what had happened to me. They knew cruelty when it stood in plain sight. I didn't give my family the satisfaction of naming them or recounting the years of mistreatment. I didn't need to. The truth of the night spoke for itself, hanging over the ballroom like a lantern illuminating everything people tried to hide. My mother's voice trembled as she whispered, "Noreen, please." My father looked as if he wanted to step forward, to reclaim the authority he always believed belonged to him. But something in his posture deflated. He'd never seen a room arrange itself around me, never seen people look at me with respect that didn't require his endorsement. Darla opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. She had run out of scripts. I set the microphone back in its stand, the soft click echoing through the room. Executives approached, offering jackets to drape over my shoulders, speaking to me with genuine care. I nodded, accepting the kindness. My family watched, stunned, as people they'd tried to influence for years walked past them to stand with me. I didn't walk toward my parents. I didn't walk toward Darla. I didn't need to. The distance between us wasn't just physical, it was earned over decades. I moved toward the steps, descending slowly. The crowd parted gently, creating a clear path. When I reached the floor, I walked right by Darla. I could feel the panic radiating from her. "Noreen, wait," she said, her voice cracking. "We can fix this." I stopped but didn't turn. Her hand hovered in the air behind me, trembling. "You can fix yourself," I said quietly. My voice carried enough weight that several people nearby heard it. "But I'm done shrinking so you can feel tall." Her breath hitched. For the first time, she understood. The dynamic she controlled her whole life was gone. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a release. I turned away and walked toward the side door of the ballroom. The moment I stepped outside, the night air swept over my face. Cool, steady, almost tender. I closed my eyes for a second and inhaled deeply. The scent of the grass, the faint echo of the music behind the walls, the hum of distant traffic, all of it grounded me. I wasn't healed. Wounds like mine didn't stitch themselves up in a single evening. They took time, patience, and distance. But I felt something lighter in my chest, something I hadn't felt since I was a child, trying to find a place in a family that never made room for me. Freedom. And for the first time in decades, the story that would follow would be mine.